Earlier today, I met Jim Wallis, author of On God's Side. He's in London to talk about his book, but also to make the case for a moral intervention in Syria. He is, however, against an armed intervention.
It's a tough and very complicated situation. There are two principles. Number one, we have to first respond to those who are most vulnerable and in jeopardy. And when there are 2 million refugees from Syria now have left the country, and a third of the population is internally been displaced. Lebanon has 4 million people. With 1 million refugees, that's like the UK having 8 million refugees. This is an enormous crisis. I'm hearing the worst in decades. So first of all, the faith community always must respond to the most vulnerable and talk to our governments about doing that. I'd like to see the US, the UK, NATO, the global community respond to this enormous crisis to the Syrian people. First of all, respond to them. Secondly, I think we must engage in the difficult task of conflict resolution. The Pope has called for this. As Christians, we're peacemakers, which means we always try to find a way to resolve a conflict. This is very complicated. For example, replacing the Assad regime might put in place in power those who are as bad or worse than he is. Some terrorist groups are leading the opposition now. So because of these principles of responding to the most vulnerable and conflict resolution, some of us in the religious community are very wary of military strikes, missile strikes, as our immediate response. And the Pope has questioned this. The U.S. Catholic Conference has told the President, please try to find a ceasefire before this. The leader of the Southern Baptists has said, this is a moral crisis, we must respond, but we don't think this military response is the best way. I want to say, when there's a moral crisis like this, we must respond. We can't be passive, we can't let this go. How we respond is, in fact, the important question. And we're in this old habit where we say, this is a moral crisis, it's severe, it's the suffering of the people is enormous, and we jump to a military response, which may not be the best response to the crisis and may undermine our moral cause and even the consequence of this so great a crisis. So how do we respond is the question. No, that we should respond is right. How we respond is the moral question.
But if we exhaust every possible response and we then get to the last resort situation, which is one of the principles of the just war, could you then see a situation where an armed response might have the support of people such as yourself?
Well, we haven't gotten there. We're not even close to last resort. So there is just cause here. There is just cause and just intention. I trust President Obama and Secretary Kerry. I consider both friends. I trust their intention here. Just cause, just intention. But there's not yet a clear possibility of success and the proportionality here. I mean, military strikes always create more innocent victims. We could be increasing the suffering here. Those who are Tomahawk missiles are not as accurate as people suggest they are. And what if in a week we have a story where a Tomahawk missile goes errant, kills Syrian civilians? Trust me, the international story, the top of the news will be U.S. military strikes kill innocent people. That story replaces Assad's chemical weapons on that day. So we haven't gotten there yet, and last resort, we're not there yet. So what does it mean to, in fact, go deeper, be more imaginative than military strikes? The strikes could result in retaliation internally from Assad or to his neighbors. They could result in more chemical weapons being used. They could result in more refugees being displaced. The consequences could undermine just cause and just intention. What's interesting, and this is the political point I suppose, the Democrats, who often oppose the rush to war, seem to be falling in behind the White House on this. The Republicans, who often push for military solutions, are trying to resolve their military preference sometimes and their general opposition to the president and all that he does. So the politicians, I think, are going to come behind this, but the religious community, in a diverse way, is raising questions. The Southern Baptists are raising questions. The Catholics, the World Evangelical Alliance, we're all raising questions here. And I hope those questions are listened to.
So what happens if it goes ahead and there is an armed response? Are you effectively at war with the administration then?
No, we would never politicize something like that. We're for the Syrian people, and we want to defend the Syrian people and all those who are in such jeopardy here. And so I think the politics are moving toward military strikes, clearly. But the faith community, we're not like the politicians. Here the discussion, sadly, was over this decision. Did Cameron win or lose? Is Labour stronger or weaker? What's number 10 look like now in Parliament? Who cares? Or I was asked, will this cause a difference between the U.S. and the UK and lose our alliance? I said, no, I'm married to the real vicar of Dibley. We'll make sure the alliance bill goes on forward. These are politically correct questions. So, no, we're not war with the administration. We're friends. But good friends raise questions. And so if politics is going to where politics is a lack of imagination. So they say, great moral crisis, so we need a big response, military. What if the military response undermines the moral case and leads to moral consequences that make things worse? Not intentionally, but unintended consequences. So we'll raise questions. It's our job to raise questions, often hard questions, and I believe they'll be listened to and considered, and the outcome will be whatever it becomes.
But if you're always worried about the moral consequences of actions, you'd never do anything, because you never know what's going to happen. And inaction often is ultimately a greater sin, isn't it? Because inaction can be dressed up as doing nothing for the right reasons, when in fact it's lacking the courage to do something.
If you listen to what I'm saying and read my statement that I'll send you later, I'm hardly talking about doing nothing here. We're talking about, first of all, massive international response to an incredible refugee crisis. I haven't seen that yet. That we can do that, and that'll be cheaper than military strikes. We could do a massive response and win the hearts and minds of the Syrian people. Number one. Number two, there has got to be a united international effort to put Assad on trial, put him on trial in absentia, prove his chemical weapons use, denounce him as a criminal, use the occasion of his using chemical weapons to turn the world against him. Even some of his allies, like Iran, are very much opposed to chemical weapons because of their history. I'd like to pressure the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese, embarrass them for their support of him. He's a criminal who uses criminal chemical weapons. The military strike debate almost becomes a side debate. The Russians are against it, we're for it, and that becomes a debate instead of this man should be the attention of worldwide international rejection, isolation, and punishment. How can we punish Assad without further punishing his people? That's the question. So I'm talking about the UN must talk about this, and we shouldn't not go there because the Russians and Chinese might veto this. Take it there and embarrass them if necessary at the UN and the global court. Let's unite the world around against Assad. Let's do that first. But quick military action, hoping it turns out well, isn't necessarily the moral equivalent to a moral crisis. So last resort is indeed last resort. And the faith community, the Pope, the Catholic bishops, I as an evangelical, the World Evangelical Alliance, the Southern Baptists don't think we are even near last resort.